Just coming off mute. So I think it's a good deck. I agree with, I think, what you've heard. My builds would be, I'm not convinced that the burning platform discussion is well phrased in terms of temperature. It's just a personal view. I think it's too abstract for those. You've sort of got two populations in an audience. You've got those who already know that climate change is a huge issue and threat, and those who do not. If you've still got people in the room who do not think it's an issue, then I'm not sure that putting up 1.5 versus 2 versus 2.5 versus 3, which we all know incredible differences in damage and risk. I'm not sure that it's meaningful for them. I don't think they can relate to it. So I'm sort of echoing that. The way that I think it's been better expressed in some of the conversations I've been in is how many disaster level hurricanes and how many billion or $trillion cleanups do you want your city to have per year? And so at the moment we sit at sort of, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we sit at sort of one devastating level cyclone in Australia per 5-year period sort of thing. Well, if you go to 2 degrees of warming, you suddenly have them every year. And if you go to 3 degrees of warming, you have them every month, sort of thing. So that frequency and that visibility of the damage is much more understandable to people. And I think they can relate to it because we've all been through storms. We don't like it when we do. We've all been through flooding. We don't like it when we do. So the fact that the flooding frequency in Western Sydney is going up, I think is focusing minds, whereas just frankly degrees is too abstract, and the day-to-day fluctuations are too big. I don't die if it's 2 degrees warmer tomorrow versus 2 degrees colder tomorrow, sort of thing. But I do die if I get hit by a massive hurricane every month. So it's just it's intended as a build. I think that's probably the way I would couch it. And then the other one I do also really like was your idea of how do you turn the everyday emitters into instruments of repair. I think that's quite a nice framework for reframing thinking on things. I would suggest it's not just physical assets; it's also companies as well.
It's also
a build. But I do think the boats one is an interesting one. I have invested into a green shipping platform, so it's a bit top of mind. But I suppose the only thing with that is raising the question about whether or not the current companies are the right instruments for doing so, or whether you have to rebuild. And I think it's an open debate. Do you have to rebuild the company from scratch, or can you pivot an existing company across? And what does that take to do so?
Well, that would be a fantastic conversation to come out of the exercise, right? That's fine with us. By the way, I totally agree with your 1.5 to 3 degree thing. I only raised that because of that BCG connection, right? Because that's interesting to me. They talked about the 1.5 degrees, and then they just let it hang there rather than to build on it. But the thing that, on the slides that I shared, I wasn't actually going to the temperature thing. I was also going to the fact that the oceans are compromised in all kinds of different ways. There's phosphates in there at levels that are unimaginable, et cetera, et cetera. So I totally agree with you that the idea of the handprint is not directly linked to temperature. It's linked to anything that can return us to a viable planet, right?
Yeah. And I think that point about if you landed on Earth under a future scenario, you wouldn't find a habitable planet. And that's sort of it's something that I've been musing on a lot, because I was at a marketing event last night, and most of the people, advertising event last night, they were having awards. And when we sort of mingled around afterwards, almost none of those folks have any idea of what their footprint is, what their drivers are. They're starting to talk about it as an industry. What does our footprint look like? Are we selling things that are good or bad for the planet? All this kind of stuff. But I'm not convinced they've got it. So I'm not convinced that the fear burning platform is going to get those folks. What we need to do, frankly, is harness the power of their greed. I'm sort of sorry to say that I suspect that we will have to have a carbon price at some point, and the company that I'm in exists fundamentally, and we can move biochar to mass scale, not because we have new technology, but because there's a market has been created. So the people who deserve the credit are those who, in effect, got the companies who have signed up to the emissions, the removals trading scheme, got them to commit billions of dollars of, in effect, voluntary carbon taxes.
Right.
which is probably what we should have economy-wide. But that discussion, I think, is for people is very confronting. But in reality, when you start looking at the costs of adaptation on an annual basis versus the annual emissions versus the total cost of adaptation versus the total annual emissions, you end up with a carbon price that's actually not bonkers. I mean, we're charging sort of $100 a ton. And the number I looked at literally this morning was only 183, which isn't crackers. So you could build that in. So I guess the tone, depending on the audience, the tone I tend to strike is, if you are a marketeer or if you are an advertising person and you want to make vast amounts of money and save the world one after the other, and in which sequence we know which way it has to be, then don't do these things because you're nice. Don't do them because the platform's burning. Don't do them because you're ethically compelled to. Because if you were, you would be doing it already. Do it because you really want to make a lot of money. And if you want to go knock an incumbent player off their perch or take their most profitable customers away from them, this is an incredibly potent lever to do so. And I'm seeing this more and more, a little bit of selective bias, I suppose, but Google have come out and are very strongly in their cloud offerings, positioning and advertising as the greenest cloud. And I think it's true. I think Microsoft is not too far behind them, but I think Amazon's quite a long way behind. So right now with the startups, when I'm talking to them, I urge them to build on Google immediately and not to even think about it, because they'll start as net zero and they'll stay as net zero as they get bigger if they're digital only. Versus if they build on AWS, yes, they'll get more credits, but they're going to have to make a shift, which will be expensive and difficult later. So if you're an attacker and you want to design a strategy at the moment, this is how I would build something. This is absolutely the go-to strategy for the next sort of 3 to 5 years. And frankly, if anyone's not built that into their planning, then they're really going to miss a trick. And I think if you appeal to their greed, you're going to get them sustained and motivated for a longer time. Sorry to say it. I sound like Gordon the Gecko, don't I?